Is the MVP now a quarterback's award? It's proven to be the case, as 14 of the last 15 winners have come from the QB position. But what if you wiped signal callers from contention? Who would have won the MVP in every single season of the Super Bowl era? Let's kick it off with this guy.
Pass. Touchdown. This guy has had some year.
Cooper Kupp was automatic in 2021, leading the Rams all the way to the Lombardi Trophy. He was Offensive Player of the Year, becoming just the 5th player in the Super Bowl era to win the receiving Triple Crown. Kupp had a league-high 145 catches, 1,947 yards, and 16 scores. We also have to mention Steelers linebacker T.J. Watt, who tied the single-season record with 22.5 sacks. Instead, it was Aaron Rodgers who took home his 4th MVP trophy with another dominant season in Green Bay. Rodgers went back-to-back, also winning in 2020. 48 touchdowns to just 5 picks will usually get the job done. But what about Derrick Henry?
Found a lot of room, and here he goes!
The Titans' power back became just the 8th player ever to rush for 2,000 yards in a single season. Henry led Tennessee to an 11-5 record and an AFC South title, gaining 200 yards on 3 separate occasions. And oh, by the way, his 17 rushing touchdowns were tops in the league. Lamar Jackson was the second unanimous MVP in league history. No one came close to him in 2019, but if QBs didn't exist, we'd look to a dominant receiver in New Orleans.
144 receptions. Mike Thomas is your new single-season record holder.
Michael Thomas was Mr. Consistent, snagging 10-plus catches in 9 different games. He led the Saints to a 13-3 campaign, winning Offensive Player of the Year with over 1,700 receiving yards. Thomas broke Marvin Harrison's record for catches in a single season with a game to spare. The record-setting year barely beats out Christian McCaffrey, who had one of his own in 2019. CMC became just the 3rd player ever with 1,000 rushing and receiving yards in the same season. 2018 was defined by up-and-coming superstar Patrick Mahomes. 5,000 passing yards and 50 touchdowns is quite the debut season. But even he couldn't get through Aaron Donald.
Taken down, ball is loose, picked up, returns it for the score! Maybe the best player in the National Football League, number 99, Aaron Donald.
The Defensive Player of the Year tormented opposing quarterbacks, leading the NFL with 20.5 sacks. Donald racked up 41 QB hits, forced 4 fumbles, and a league-best 25 tackles for loss, all while leading the Rams to Super Bowl 53. The GOAT took home his 3rd MVP in 2017, leading the Pats to another Super Bowl. But out west, it was a different LA star making his case.
And he will leapfrog a defender, and a touchdown!
A lot of Rams on this list early. Todd Gurley was a monster in 2017. He was named Offensive Player of the Year, and rightfully so. 2,093 yards from scrimmage, most in the NFL. 19 total touchdowns, most in the NFL. Gurley was a prolific dual threat, leading the Rams to the playoffs for the first time since 2004. That's where they lost to Matt Ryan, the 2016 MVP winner, and while Matty Ice was a machine that year, another stud NFC rusher was bursting onto the scene.
Elliott for the touchdown!
Ezekiel Elliott was nothing short of exceptional in his first season, racking up a league-high 1,631 yards on the ground and 16 total scores. In a world without quarterbacks, he'd also be Rookie of the Year, as backfield mate Dak Prescott earned that honor. The duo transformed the Cowboys from 4-12 to an NFC best 13-3. Cam Newton was the league's most valuable player in 2015. Superman led the Panthers to a 15-1 record and a Super Bowl berth. At the same time, J.J. Watt was on an unprecedented tear in Houston.
And it was Watt who stripped him.
The runaway Defensive Player of the Year winner terrorized his opponents in a 4th straight All-Pro season. Watt amassed 17.5 sacks and 29 tackles for loss, both league bests. The Texans went 9-7 and earned a division title, and if quarterbacks didn't exist, this would be his 2nd straight MVP honor. As good as Watt was that year, he was even better in 2014.
And the big fella lumbering inside the 40.
Watt lined up top of your screen. They go his way. Watt!
Oh my gosh.
He's saying he's got it, and he does!
Number 99 was probably the best all-around athlete in football that season. He tallied 20.5 sacks, 51 QB hits, 29 tackles for loss, 4 forced fumbles, and a pick six. The Defensive Player of the Year even scored 3 offensive touchdowns to top it all off. His 5 total scores were the most for any lineman since 1944. Not bad. But he was an MVP. That went to Aaron Rodgers in another prolific season for the Pack. If you want to talk gaudy numbers, there's Peyton Manning in 2013. The Sheriff took home an unprecedented 5th MVP after a single-season record for passing yards and touchdowns. But let's entertain a QB-free universe where 2 superstar running backs take home the hardware instead.
And Charles now a foot race. Goodbye!
Jamal Charles dropped 4 scores in the first half on the Raiders on his way to a 5 TD masterpiece in Week 15, and that was no fluke. The Chiefs' speedster dominated in 2013, racking up nearly 2,000 yards from scrimmage and a league-best 19 touchdowns. Meanwhile, his NFC counterpart, LaShawn McCoy, was doing similar damage.
McCoy through the snow. Touchdown.
Shady was a workhorse, leading the league in total touches, rushing yards, and yards from scrimmage. The electrifying back added 11 touchdowns and led the Eagles to a division title.
He is going all the way.
Rob Gronkowski now. He produced the best season ever for a tight end in 2011.
Still on his feet. 10-5 touchdown.
In just his second year, the All-Pro hauled in 90 catches for over 1,300 yards and 18 total touchdowns, obliterating the previous tight end record of 13. Gronk recorded 7 multi-touchdown games as the Patriots reached Super Bowl 46. But 2011 was all about Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. The MVP tossed 45 scores and just 6 interceptions in a 15-1 season. We'll allow it. A year earlier, it was Gronk's quarterback earning a unanimous MVP nod. Sure, Tom Brady was the obvious choice, but that's no fun. The new MVP? How about Troy Polamalu?
How about that? Oh my goodness.
The Defensive Player of the Year was a bona fide wrecking ball in 2010. Polamalu did it all for the Steelers, racking up 63 tackles, 7 interceptions, a sack, a forced fumble, and a touchdown in just 14 games. With number 43 patrolling the secondary, Pittsburgh boasted the league's top-scoring defense and earned its 3rd Super Bowl appearance in 6 seasons. Polamalu's effort barely beats out Arian Foster, who amassed over 2,200 yards from scrimmage and 18 total touchdowns, both league bests. For this next decade, let's just pretend Peyton Manning doesn't exist. It'll make this list go much faster. The Sheriff won a staggering 4 MVPs in 2003, 04, 08, and 09, and we're bypassing all of them because he's just too good. So, our 2009 MVP is none other than CJ2K.
Johnson hurdling. Watch out! Again!
Chris Johnson became just the 6th rusher in NFL history to join the 2,000-yard club, totaling 16 scores and a record 2,509 yards from scrimmage for the Titans. The Offensive Player of the Year handled a league-high 408 touches while ripping off a ridiculous 5.6 yards per carry. For 2008, the honor goes to a Steelers Super Bowl hero.
James Harrison to run it back. Harrison going down the sideline. Harrison still on his feet.
While James Harrison cemented his legacy in Super Bowl 43, his regular season was no less impressive. The undrafted stud recorded 92 total tackles, 16 sacks, an interception, a safety, and a league-leading 7 forced fumbles. Harrison was named Defensive Player of the Year, beating out fellow pass rusher DeMarcus Ware, whose 20 sacks also made him a prime candidate for this list. In fact, 2008 was stacked with MVP talent. Safety Ed Reed and his 3 return touchdowns deserves a mention, as do running backs Adrian Peterson and Michael Turner, who put up Pro Bowl seasons of their own. The 2007 regular season was all about the Patriots, so if Tom Brady and his then record 50 passing touchdowns wasn't MVP, his teammate Randy Moss would be.
Going deep for Moss at the
Did he catch that touchdown?
Moss looked dominant on paper, and he was. 98 catches for nearly 1,500 yards and an NFL record 23 receiving touchdowns is nothing to scoff at. But the way he toyed with secondaries was truly terrifying. He looked like a varsity senior playing against the neighborhood middle school. That is, of course, until Super Bowl 42. It's 2004 now, and Peyton Manning still doesn't exist. Alas, this year it's all about Ed Reed, the definition of ball hawk. And when he got his hands on the rock, he was a game breaker.
103 yards.
The Ravens allowed 14 passing touchdowns in 2004, tied for the fewest in the league. The Defensive Player of the Year snagged 9 interceptions and returned them for 358 yards, both league highs. He also racked up 78 tackles, 2 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, and 2 touchdowns. We also want to mention Curtis Martin, who led the league with 1,700 rushing yards, carrying the Jets to a playoff berth. Peyton Manning and Steve McNair shared MVP honors in 2003, but we're going with a record-setting pair of running backs.
Got an opening. I'd say he's going to get his touches.
Jamal Lewis detonated in Week 2, rattling off an NFL record 295 yards against the Browns. The Offensive Player of the Year led the league with 2,066 rushing yards, along with 14 touchdowns. Lewis became the 5th player ever to hit the 2,000-yard mark as the Ravens clinched their first division title in franchise history. Meanwhile, Lewis's former teammate was orchestrating an all-time season in Kansas City.
There's the NFL record for Priest Holmes.
Priest Holmes was the catalyst for the Chiefs' league-leading scoring offense. The 30-year-old compiled 2,110 scrimmage yards and a then-record 27 rushing scores. It's wild to think that these studs shared a backfield just 3 years earlier. Holmes was also a beast in 2002, taking home Offensive Player of the Year honors. But he wasn't MVP, Rich Gannon was, who led the Raiders to an AFC title. In Super Bowl 37, Oakland was no match for the Bucs and Derek Brooks, our choice for MVP that season.
Derek Brooks, who ran back 3 interceptions for touchdowns in the regular season, does it to cement the Super Bowl.
Brooks recorded 4 defensive touchdowns in 2002, a league best and an unheard-of number for a linebacker. In all, the future Hall of Famer notched 5 picks and 118 total tackles as the Buccaneers boasted the league's top defense. The greatest show on turf was really something special. Kurt Warner was league MVP in 2001, but it could have easily been teammate Marshall Faulk. We'll be talking about him for a bit. Faulk's 3-year run was as productive as it gets.
He's in the clear at the 30, got a block, 20, to the 10, 5, and he got it. In. Yeah. Touchdown, Marshall Faulk.
If Warner was the driver of the St. Louis offense, Faulk was the engine. He produced a league-best 21 touchdowns in just 14 games and finished second with 2,147 yards from scrimmage. The dynamic back ripped off an NFL-high 5.3 yards per carry on his way to Offensive Player of the Year honors and a Super Bowl berth. Quick mention of Michael Strahan, too, who was football's best defender and the new single-season sack leader in 2001. But we gotta get back to Marshall. Faulk was even better a year earlier, earning MVP honors outright. In '99, Warner secured the first of his 2 MVP awards, and again, his running back was nearly as good.
Gets across the line of scrimmage, and then some more. Breaks a tackle at the 25, to the 20, heading to the outside, to the 10, to the 5. Touchdown, Rams!
In his first season with the Rams, Faulk's versatility was on full display as he topped the NFL with over 2,400 yards from scrimmage. The All-Pro became just the 2nd player ever to gain 1,000 yards rushing and receiving in the same season. He was again the runaway Offensive Player of the Year, guiding St. Louis to a win in Super Bowl 34. Brett Favre won a record 3 consecutive MVPs from 1995 to 1997. But that 3rd one was actually shared with another guy you may have heard of.
Oh, what a move! Oh, my!
If we're wiping quarterbacks off the board, Sanders' 2,000-yard season wins MVP in 1997. The future Hall of Famer averaged an absurd 6.1 yards per carry, becoming the 3rd player to hit 2,000 on the ground. Sanders won Offensive Player of the Year and piled up nearly 2,400 yards from scrimmage, leading Detroit to the playoffs. In '96, Terrell Davis was the man of the hour.
Elway hands off Davis, right side, big hole, Davis over the 35-40. Terrell Davis! Woo-hoo.
Denver's marquee back found the end zone 15 times and rumbled for 1,538 yards, breaking a 22-year-old franchise record. TD powered the Broncos to 13 wins and was named Offensive Player of the Year. Pretty good. Okay, we're in 1995 now. Still no Brett Favre, remember? Instead, we're giving out co-MVPs to arguably the best ever at their positions.
Here's Rice, makes a cut into the end zone.
It was a banner year for Jerry Rice, who became the all-time leader in receptions and yardage in 1995, all while setting a single-season record with 1,848 receiving yards. He had 5 games of at least 150 yards, including a 289-yard, 3-touchdown masterpiece in Week 16. Meanwhile, Emmitt Smith was cementing his legacy in Dallas.
Emmitt Smith, watch out. This could be over.
Mr. Consistent led the NFL with nearly 1,800 yards and a then-record 25 rushing scores. Smith hit the century mark in 11 of his 16 regular season games and delivered the Cowboys its 3rd title in 4 years. Now we're in 1994, when Steve Young delivered a career-best performance, earning his 2nd MVP as the league's most efficient passer. But in a QB-free scenario, Barry gets another one.
20 cuts inside of the 15, outside of the 10. Barry to the stiff arm 5, and touchdown!
The human highlight reel was added again in '94. Sanders led the league with nearly 1,900 rushing yards. As usual, he galloped through defenses, racking up 5.7 yards per carry. Sanders rushed for over 150 yards in 5 separate games and won Offensive Player of the Year. We're back to Emmitt for 1992. While Steve Young would earn his first MVP, Smith and the Cowboys eventually knocked the 49ers out of the playoffs.
And Smith will easily stroll in. Aikman back, he's pressured, he throws it out, Smith's there, he's got the first down coming right to 5. Irvin's blocked, puts him in.
The Dallas legend topped the NFL in rushing for the 2nd straight season. Smith's 19 total touchdowns were also a league high as the Cowboys went on to win their first Super Bowl since 1977. Defensive end Bruce Smith gets our MVP vote in 1990. The Bills' legend was Defensive Player of the Year, amassing 19 sacks and over 100 tackles. He barely beat out Derek Thomas, who led the league with 20 sacks and 6 forced fumbles. Unfortunately for both of them, Joe Montana was still in prime condition, securing his 2nd straight MVP selection. So if we're not talking about Montana in '89, who was our non-quarterback winner then? I bet you wouldn't have guessed Keith Millard.
Millard with an interception, 25-30.
Millard was the centerpiece of a vicious Minnesota defense in the late '80s, and he deserves his day in the sun. The defensive tackle was a pass-rushing machine, totaling 18 sacks, an interception, fumble recovery, and a touchdown. Boomer Esiason was MVP in 1988 and nearly beat the Niners in Super Bowl 23, but San Francisco ruled the NFL for about a decade, and that's why we're talking about Roger Craig now.
What a run by Roger Craig. You'll never see a better one than that.
In case Bill Walsh didn't have enough offensive talent, Craig erupted in 1988, breaking the franchise single-season rushing record. He was named Offensive Player of the Year, gaining over 2,000 yards from scrimmage. Jump back a year earlier, same team, different player. It's arguably the biggest MVP snub of all time.
Jerry Rice, he has more touchdowns than NASA, I think, at this point.
In just his 3rd season, Jerry Rice hauled in 22 receiving touchdowns, an NFL record before Moss topped it 20 years later. But Rice did it in 12 games. He was the Offensive Player of the Year as the 49ers marched to a 13-2 record. Nonetheless, the MVP went to John Elway, who guided Denver to a 2nd straight Super Bowl appearance. Dan Marino tore up the record books in 1984, breaking 6 major NFL passing records. There's no doubting his MVP, but what about Eric Dickerson?
He's got it, and a brand new single-season rushing record.
The second year back rushed for a ridiculous 2,105 yards, setting an NFL record that still stands today. Dickerson couldn't be stopped, averaging 5.6 yards per carry and tying the league lead with 14 rushing touchdowns. But that shouldn't be surprising, considering he delivered the greatest rookie rushing season of all time just a year prior.
Got some good yardage. Dickerson can run. Still going. Dickerson will go.
441 touches, 2,212 yards from scrimmage, and 18 rushing touchdowns. All are still rookie bests 40 years later. The SMU phenom finished second in MVP voting in 1983. The hardware went to Joe Theismann, who guided the reigning champs to their second straight NFC title. Ken Anderson was league MVP in 1981, taking the Bengals all the way to Super Bowl 16. But let's consider Tony Dorsett.
35-40, still on his feet at the 50. One more block, he might go.
The Dallas back earned his only career All-Pro nod and nearly carried the Cowboys to a Super Bowl. He was the constant for America's team, racking up nearly 2,000 yards from scrimmage. Before we hit our final stretch, it's time to talk about Earl Campbell. Like Emmett and Falk earlier, Campbell is on this list by sandwiching his actual MVP season between two near equally dominant displays.
Campbell, he has great speed, and he has tremendous strength.
Campbell completed the rushing trifecta in 1980, leading the league in carries, yards, and tied for the most rushing scores. The Offensive Player of the Year amassed nearly 2,000 yards and led the Oilers to the playoffs. But he wasn't MVP. Any guesses? How about Browns quarterback Brian Sipe? Go figure. Maybe it's because Campbell was coming off an actual MVP season in 1979 and preceded that one with an absolutely iconic rookie year.
Watch out! Robertson on his back! Watch out! Beautiful, beautiful! Oh!
The Texas stud was a one-man wrecking crew in 1978. He led the NFL in rushing, was named Offensive Player of the Year, and took the Oilers to the AFC Championship game as a rookie. But the MVP went to Terry Bradshaw, who delivered another Super Bowl season for Pittsburgh. And when you think of 70s Steelers, you must bring up Jack Lambert.
Jack Lambert, All-Pro in '75.
Lambert epitomized the gritty steel curtain defense and had a spectacular season in 1976. He tallied 2 picks and a league-high 8 fumble recoveries. Lambert was the Defensive Player of the Year, but he wasn't MVP. That honor went to Colts quarterback Burt Jones. Vikings legend Fran Tarkenton was anointed as the league's most valuable player in 1975, but he barely beat out O.J. Simpson, who topped the league in nearly every rushing category. You probably know Ken Stabler, he was MVP in 1974, but can we interest you in Terry Metcalf? He played just 6 seasons in the NFL, but in 1974, he was the league's most versatile player.
Terry Metcalf's 75-yard touchdown run was the longest of the season in the NFL.
The second-year running back amassed 2,058 all-purpose yards and 8 scores. The Cardinals went 10-4 and were playoff-bound for the first time in 26 years. John Brody earned MVP honors in 1970, and his wide receiver Gene Washington earns an honorable mention. But we're here to talk about Vikings defensive end Alan Page.
Alan Page, and did he get off the ball fast that night? He was about as quick off the ball as any lineman in pro football.
Page actually won MVP in 1971, and he was just as dominant a year earlier. The future Hall of Famer gobbled up a league-best 7 fumble recoveries. The Purple People Eaters seeded the fewest points in the NFL, finishing 12-2. In 1969, it's Page's teammate Carl Eller who gets the nod. Led by the All-Pro lineman, Minnesota's defense allowed fewer than 10 points per game as they reached Super Bowl IV. In 1968, Earl Morrall replaced an injured Johnny Unitas and earned league MVP. No doubt a great story, but we have to shed some light on Leroy Kelly.
An indestructible force named Kelly contributed 127 yards and 3 touchdowns.
Kelly was easily the league's best rusher that season, leading the league with over 1,500 yards from scrimmage and 20 touchdowns. He rallied the Browns to the NFL championship game, where they fell to Morrall and the Colts. A year earlier, Unitas was fully healthy and also league MVP, but even he couldn't shake Deacon Jones.
Jones is in to drop him.
Probably the scariest of the Rams' fearsome foursome, Jones actually coined the term sack. And he had a bunch of them in 1967. With number 75 in pursuit, LA fielded the league's best scoring defense, finishing 11-1-2. It's finally time to put a bow on this list. Now, Bart Starr led his team to a win in their first ever Super Bowl, so he probably deserves MVP, but let's erase quarterbacks one last time and teach you a thing or two about Larry Wilson. The Hall of Fame safety was everywhere in 1966, leading the league with 10 interceptions and returning 2 of those for touchdowns. Wilson even got 6 MVP votes himself, and they were all well-deserved.